Today we're joined by Professor Richard Bownas, a political scientist at the University of Northern Colorado, who specializes in Nepal's political and social transformation, one of the leading academic voices on it. He has also done extensive fieldwork in the country, along with the recent Fulbright research, where he was able to gather the oral history and the grassroots level social memory of the general folks in the area. So uh, thank you, Professor, for being here with us. Glad to have you with us.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
So guys, briefly starting on this, the September uprising sort of like exposed a collapse of trust, not just in the, like the political parties, but in a broader institutional architecture that was, created after 2015. From a perspective, the social media ban, was it really like sort of like a structural failure that allowed it to, basically escalate into a nationwide revolt? Was this like a institutional fragility or like a mostly, accumulation of grievances or something else?
Yeah, that's a broad set of questions. I mean, I think, I'd see it structurally rather than just based on a social media ban. Obviously, the
Mhm.
social media ban was because young people were exposing party-based nepotism and
Yeah.
corruption. And so that is a structural issue with the way Nepal's political parties have evolved,
Hmm.
uh, especially over the last 15 years since the end of the Civil War. But
Yeah.
I think you can trace some of the problems back to the 1990s as well, even if
Hmm.
they were not nearly as extreme back then.
Yeah.
So, in my understanding, based on my field work and sort of the work I'm trying to put together,
Yeah.
hopefully into a monograph, into a book at some point,
Hmm.
is this issue of particization or partyocracy or whatever you want to call it, where instead of parties performing their normal function that they're supposed to in liberal political theory, which
Hmm.
is as intermediaries between the people and the state,
Yeah.
parties become power centers in and of themselves, in
Yeah.
effect cartels, mafias. I mean, there's various analogies you can use, uh, but you have a society dominated by three large parties which rotate power between themselves and
Hmm.
which act like giant kind of rent seekers in the economic sense of trying to, make profits from rents, from control of different sectors of the economy.
Hmm.
And I think that was the underlying issue, to be honest. That
Yeah.
was the deep underlying issue. And I think the stuff about Nepo babies
Yeah.
obviously reflects that because the Nepo babies came from the big parties. And so
Hmm.
I think it's this underlying issue of particization, which has been growing for at least 10 or 15 years.
That is correct. Yeah, yeah. Some the analysis what they are pointing to was that this particular protest was not just about the social media ban, but what it was actually, the causation of it. Just like the when people started exposing the nepo babies, it obviously it started like exposing. Okay, so this is where the allegedly, the corrupt money or like the corruption is going through, and that's what like people were mostly grieving against. And the social media was that sort of like a spark that eventually led to what it became. But I believe what was extreme about what transpired in those couple of days was like the speed of which this happened, and the significance of like what went down in just like the 2 days. We're still like seeing those effects right now. It's sort of like kind of delegitimize the existing structure with one of the top political leaders say about that they were essentially softly retiring per se. So yeah, what would you
Well,
say
yes,
like?
yes. I mean, I think as we get further from the event,
Hmm.
it becomes clear that it's not easy to change these structural conditions, right?
Yeah.
So yes, in history we see spontaneous uprisings, whether it be the peasants' revolt in England in the
Hmm.
14th century, or
Yeah.
you could probably think of many other instances where for a few weeks it
Hmm.
does seem as if the existing structure has been, as you said, delegitimated,
Yeah.
and as if there's going to be a kind of revolution in thinking and in institutions.
Yeah.
But even now, just like 2 months, 2.5 months, I guess, away from the event, we're
Hmm.
beginning to see those structures reassert
Yeah.
themselves, right? And as a political scientist, uh, I would tend to put an emphasis on structure
Hmm.
over spontaneous uprising. And this might be, unfortunately, of course, this might be a case of that.
That yeah, I believe like the reality that Nepalese people right now they're facing is even those the three parties that we mentioned sort of like playing musical chairs among themselves with the power and the cabinets. The dilemma that Nepalese people are facing is looking for an alternative. Is that those three parties they have like been able to sort of build a structure and gather capital and whatnot for their
Yes,
years of being in power. So for a new and spontaneous power to come into play and going head to head against them is something that doesn't seem
yes.
plausible, at least in the near future.
And that's because the parties have a social function as well, right? So the student wings of the parties provide
Hmm.
real services for students. Think of all
Yeah,
of those students coming from outside of Kathmandu, not knowing what to do when they get to the big city. And so they join a student wing, whether it's Congress or
yeah,
UML or Maoist. They provide them with all sorts of, it could be picnics, it could be
uh-huh.
access to job opportunities, internships. Um, are any, that's a real thing. It's not just the parties are sort of evil institutions that we have to overturn. You have to find a way
Yeah.
to replace that.
Hmm.
And so, are any of these groups emerging out of Hami, Nepal, any of the Gen Z activists, are they going to be able to replicate those kind of real services? And
Hmm.
if they can't, people are going to, young people are going to gradually go back to the old parties. And they're going to say the old parties had their problems,
Hmm.
but it looks like maybe they're reforming a little bit. Maybe
Yeah.
eventually even the leadership will step aside for younger people. And
Hmm.
at least with the old parties, you know where you are, right?
Yeah.
If you get inside the structure, which has been in existence for decades, which is very well established, which has tentacles in every sphere of Nepali life,
Hmm.
if you're in that structure, you at least have opportunities, right?
Yeah.
Will the Gen Z political activists be able to offer something? Or will any of these new parties, like Haka Sampang's new party, for example, will they
Hmm.
be able to offer those same facilities, right, that actually attract people?
Yeah. So the other thing like to consider right now is so what went down on September that sort of like decreased or even like erased the trust that Nepalese people had on law enforcement, particularly the Nepalese police, and the after effects of that is like what we're seeing is we have a lot of these law enforcement professionals they are resigning or like basically being laid off and whatnot. And so there's like a lot of change in leadership. And so based on that, and the general morale of that particular institution, do you think there is like a scenario where they can effectively function, as they were with the current government base or, current interim government as they did with the previous government?
Yeah, I mean that's not something because I was last
Hmm.
in Nepal in July, so before the protests.
Yeah.
So I pass on that question because I don't have access to the sort of insider information
Okay.
uh, on the morale in the police force.
Hmm.
I mean, I know there's as with so many institutions, there's been a feeling of the police force has been politicized, that
Yeah.
senior leaders have been picked and chosen by party leaders.
Hmm.
Um, so when those patron-client relations are kind of called into question,
Yeah.
that no doubt will lead to a reduction in morale.
Hmm.
Um, so we'll have to see if a more independently selected leadership can make a difference, or whether that will even happen. So I don't know.
Got it.
I don't
Yeah.
know much about that.
Yeah, sort of like zooming out from Nepal and like looking into these similar events that transpired in South Asia, mostly in Bangladesh and also like with Sri Lanka. I mean Sri Lanka is sort of like has taken a different route, but Bangladesh it's somewhat similar to Nepal, with the interim government and a basically like a non-political figure stepping up to taking the reins. So do you see like there's sort of like similarities with Nepal and like Bangladesh, and if there's something that Nepal could learn from, what's going on like transpiring in
Well, I mean, they
Bangladesh?
have they have the same problem that I don't
Hmm.
think they fixed a date for elections in Bangladesh as of now, right?
Hmm.
So,
Yeah.
um, yeah, I mean, it's again, it's like in Nepal. I
Yeah.
think the structures, although they're a little bit different in Bangladesh, and they're more kind of feudal, right, and sort of based around big families and landowning families, I guess. It may be a slightly different scenario, but those structures are likely to keep re-emerging.
Hmm.
They have a slightly better situation in some ways. I guess Mohammed Yunus is a more sort of renowned international figure who has a certain
Yeah.
kind of prestige geostrategically, is sort of seen as a somebody who's worked with the big powers, with America in the past. So obviously, the current prime minister in Nepal doesn't have that sort of cachet, that sort of prestige internationally.
Hmm.
So that's a difference. But yeah, again, I'm not an expert on Bangladesh, so I wouldn't want
Hmm.
to. I wouldn't want to. I mean, it's something
Yeah.
I want to work on, these comparisons, but it's not something that I'm able to speak about right now.
Got it. Yeah, and talking about like the general like the socio-economic aspect of Nepal and as a on with your work like and from what you've gathered about like Nepalese general public and in the grassroots level, what would you say would be like some of the most immediate socio-economic impacts of these uprising and in like a short term and maybe like if there is going to be really a long-term lingering effects of this particular uprising or what's
Well, I
that?
mean,
Yeah.
it links to what we've been talking about. If you can get rid of, if you can reduce,
Hmm.
not get rid of, if you can reduce rent seeking
Hmm.
by political parties, you
Yeah.
will open up opportunities. I mean, so the new energy minister, was it Mr. Gil Singh?
Cool. Cool.
Yeah,
Cool Mangishan. Yeah.
yeah, who has a great reputation, who was
Yeah.
sacked by the previous government, right, because he
Uh-huh.
wasn't in line with their priorities.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the kind of thing. If it's replicated at
Hmm.
multiple levels of society, not just at the level of the cabinet, but going down to local, water user committees, forestry user committees,
Hmm.
all of these institutions that have become part of the party machines.
Yeah.
If that was somehow to be dissolved, that would be great. But if it's only at the level of cabinet officers, it's
Hmm.
probably not going to make a big difference. But
Okay.
definitely, rent seeking by political parties damages the socioeconomic prospects for young people. Because when you live in a rent seeking society,
Hmm.
uh, what the rent seekers don't want is large scale investment or change or development because they want to sit on what they have, right?
Hmm.
And they have
Yeah.
no incentive to invest in productive development. Okay, so we see a lot of roads because there's this connection between parties and
Yeah.
road building contractors, but we're
Hmm.
not going to see investment in long-term health, education, skills because those things don't create a return to the political party machine.
Yeah.
So yes, if we can get rid of rent-seeking political party machines, there will, in the long term, be a benefit to young Nepali people who will then maybe not have to seek migration opportunities and stuff like that. But as of this point, we have to be realistic, right? Those machines are there
Hmm.
for a reason. They are very deeply embedded,
Yeah.
and making a few superficial changes at the top is not going to remove those machines from everyday life.
That's correct. Also, speaking about I believe the long-standing the political parties and the structures they've created, and in a way, the I think like the local, I mean, Indians' influence and the Indian, political, influence over Nepal is mostly like dealing with those long-standing parties. So, and for the upcoming election and also like for the cooperation, during this interim government time, should the interim government actually expect like the same level of support from them, or how would you say like would the international like support to Nepal would like play out, considering like that they have like a mostly unfamiliar government and people to work
Mm. Yeah, I mean, well, are they really unfamiliar? I mean, I would imagine
with? Hmm.
India
Yeah,
has multiple levels of connections with all sorts of groups in Nepal,
yeah,
trying to hedge its bets in the
hmm,
way any great power does when it's
yeah,
involved in another country. I mean, we've seen in the past, India has been very flexible. about
Mm-hmm.
what kind of government it will tolerate in Nepal, right? Where
Okay.
previously they were happy to work with the monarchy, they were
Mm-hmm.
kind of pro-monarchy at various times.
Yeah.
They were happy, according to some people, to work with the Maoists, right? I
Mm-hmm.
mean, after all, they were there in India, the Maoist leadership for significant periods of time.
Yeah.
They will work. They're very pragmatic, I think, and they will work with whoever they think is likely to be in Nepal in leadership for the medium to long term.
Mm-hmm.
Whether that's no, whether the influence of India is positive is another question. But I
Mm-hmm.
don't think they're that bothered about who they work with.
Okay.
I mean, I
Um.
think I think one thing I have explored obviously is there's that they would prefer a government that is critical of China.
Mm-hmm.
There's no doubt about that. And in that regard, India and the United States are on the same side, right?
Yeah.
And you see some inklings of that with some of these Hindutva organizations,
Okay.
which have been set up in the last year or two, which are very focused on Chinese influence
Mm-hmm.
in Nepali politics. So I've
Yeah.
heard, they're spreading rumors that the Chinese army, the PLA, is active in the Terai, this kind of thing, which is
Yeah.
not really backed up by any evidence. But
Uh-huh.
there are Hindutva organizations which are quite well connected, right? Which are
Yeah.
spreading kind of rumors on Facebook. And so that is a backdoor way in which India can influence Nepali politics. And I don't think it's really dependent on who is the prime minister or who is the president, right?
Mm-hmm.
They will find ways to influence things. And so
Got
will
it.
the United States, right? I mean, let's face it, Nepal is a medium-sized country in a
Mm-hmm.
geostrategically
Mm-hmm.
important place.
Yeah.
And there are three great powers, India, the United States, and China, which are going to be interested in
Yeah.
manipulating, influencing what happens in Nepal. I mean, that's just a reality.
Okay.
Uh, and
So
they'll
yeah.
use whatever methods they can, right?
So yeah, from what I'm hearing is like it's mostly if like the system is there and with the functioning properly, then I believe like the most of the powers would be flexible to work as long it's
Yeah,
in
but
a
I
way
mean,
that.
to be more optimistic, if Nepal, I mean, again, if Nepal can reform its party system and
Hmm.
get parties that work like real political parties are supposed to, right, sort of representing the interests of the people,
Hmm.
then one would hope the leadership, the kind of people that rise to leadership in those parties, would be less manipulable by foreign actors, right?
Yeah. Hmm.
Uh, Again, we shouldn't be too optimistic. I'm a realist, right?
Yeah.
but if you have parties that don't function as mafias, right,
Hmm.
domestically, uh, those kind of parties are less likely to be in the pockets of some foreign power, right?
Yeah.
Uh, but you have to be realistic that if you look at any country in Nepal's position, there's always going to be foreign intelligence agencies and outside powers trying to manipulate people.
Yeah. Um, Talk a little bit more about, the social aspect and the difference in like the sophistication of people. Like, so I believe, not to generalize too much. So let's say we can take a look at two different sets of people, say like a more of a older and people in what the rural parts of Nepal with like with access to less education facilities and less socially and like sophisticated according to the modern standards compared to the the urban population who are a little bit I would say more aware and I believe you're more sophisticated and more aware of like how things are like progressing. So yeah, going forwards, would like the feelings that or like the same agendas that the Zenji population who are like mostly from the urban areas, would that like translate like universally like through the rural population as well?
Yeah, and so that's I've seen from what I've picked up on discussions online that seems to be a big issue with the Gen Z movement that they
Hmm.
have been very urban based and
Yeah.
obviously highly educated. I mean, that's pretty much what you'd expect. I guess that was true of all the previous social movements of this kind
Hmm.
in
Okay.
Poland in the 1990s and 2000s,
Hmm.
and before that as well, right? They've
Yeah.
generally been movements of the educated middle class, upper middle class in Kathmandu. I see that they've tried to bring in different voices in the last few weeks, right? There seems to have been an effort
Hmm.
from the Hani Nepal people and
Yeah.
to sort of include other people. But I think the frustrations are similar. I did a bunch of oral history interviews in 2024, so like a
Hmm.
year and a half ago, across large parts of mainly rural Nepal and small
Okay.
towns, medium-sized towns, rural areas. And the complaints were definitely very similar. When I did surveys amongst students in Kathmandu, I found pretty similar results. So I don't think the analysis of the problem is
Hmm.
different.
Okay.
Go back to the same thing. It's these rent-seeking party machines, right?
Hmm.
That is what people complain about if it's a small village in far west Nepal,
Yeah.
or it's a student, middle-class student in Kathmandu.
Hmm.
But the idea of what the solutions might be is obviously going to be possibly different, right? And
Hmm.
I don't see the Gen Z movement talking much about the federal structure, right?
Yeah.
I mean, do they want to keep that in place? Uh, in the urgency to change things at the top. You don't want to ignore all the issues of inclusion, of Madish, of Terai,
Hmm.
of all of the
Yeah.
ethnic minorities in hills. Um, so yeah, I think the diagnosis of the problems is the same, but
Hmm.
I suspect people in rural areas would have a different sense of what the solution should be.
Got it. Yeah, I think most of like the like you said like the previous protests I think they had like sort of like a general inclusivity to them, with the Maoist movements and whatnot. They had like sort of like the inclusivity of having like all these people from like many different walks of life and regions from Nepal. Mostly like they started out with the people in the rural areas slowly,
Yes.
and
Although
yeah,
to some
it,
extent that was co-optation, right? And
yeah.
that was to some
Mhm.
extent a cynical move to get an army
Yeah.
basically of people who are most disgruntled and most upset about the system.
Hmm.
Um, so I mean, even the Maoists, right, in the end turned out to be very Kathmandu centric, upper caste, right?
Yeah.
So it's hard to pinpoint many movements that genuinely
Hmm.
had a leadership base outside of the Kathmandu elite.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, like, yeah, that's what I think the one thing that's sort of like different about this particular protest is like this was sort of like a leaderless protest. It was, mostly like not a single group was like, saying like, okay, this is how we are going to formulate this process. It was like many different groups, they, coming in together and the protest happens and whatnot. So I think that's where the disconnect happened is like, in the aftermath, there was like not a single or like united voice or like path that they were able to sort of like carve out to say, okay, this is what the protest was about. This is what transpired, and okay, this is what we were our agenda wanted to accomplish. So I think so. The intergovernmental now is the only solution for them is to basically conduct an election and hope that the public goes the other way.
Yes, I mean, well, leaderless, yeah, I mean, but that's in politics that can't last for long, right?
Hmm.
When
Yeah.
there's a vacuum, organized groups, we could say organized minorities, right, always win, right?
Hmm.
People, groups who have solid, even if they're a small number of people who have solid organization, who know what they're doing, have clear intentionality. And the problem is, a bunch of idealistic and leaderless people will very quickly be, taken over by organized groups. And so
Hmm.
that could well be the youth wings of the established parties, right? It does seem as if they're trying to put on a gloss. Uh,
Hmm.
they represent a change, a reform.
Yeah.
Give us a chance. We'll show you that we're different.
Hmm.
Um, and then the various other groups that, like we said, Haka Sampang's new
Yeah.
party, so forth, right?
Hmm.
Again, I'm skeptical that his party will be able to get its tentacles into society in the way the established parties do, right? Coming as it does from, a particular sort of, ethnic origin and far from Kathmandu. I don't see that happening.
Hmm.
Um, so again, I don't mean to sound too pessimistic. I feel I'm sounding very pessimistic here, but
Uh-huh.
as a kind of realist, political scientist,
Hmm.
I do tend to see things in terms of who can organize. It tends to be elites who can organize, people
Hmm.
who have the resources,
Hmm.
and people can be manipulated, right, quite
Yeah.
easily. People who, if people have been in party politics in Nepal for like 40 or 50 years, which many
Hmm.
of these people have, they are incredibly sophisticated actors who know how to mobilize people
Yeah.
at all levels of society. And these Gen Z activists are not, right? So idealism alone is not enough to change systems.
Got it. Definitely. So I think like time. So I have one last question for you. Uh, as looking at this retrospectively after like a couple of months, how do you consider like what went down? Do you consider this sort of like would this be uh, called like a revolution, going forwards, or would that basically be a like a a movement or a protest that went a little bit overboard?
Yeah, I won't call it a revolution. I definitely wouldn't. I mean, I'm skeptical
Hmm.
about the word revolution applied to even classic cases of revolution.
Uh-huh.
In that, like I was suggesting, there's usually some organized group of elites
Hmm.
behind that revolution. In this case, I mean, James Scott, the political and social theorist, talks about sort of weapons of the weak. He talks
Hmm.
about sort of spontaneous moral outrage that can
Uh-huh.
emerge when people feel just too oppressed,
Okay.
that the basic moral contract has been
Hmm.
broken. People engage in vandalism, in rioting, and I guess in a sense, this is an example of that. It's a kind of spontaneous moral outrage against what people just feel is insupportable, is unjustifiable by any normal kind of morality, right? The
Okay.
Nepo baby stuff, the corruption. Uh,
Hmm.
so I wouldn't call it a revolution. If a revolution suggests an organized political intent
Hmm.
with a group capable of sophisticated political organization, then this is not a revolution. This is a spontaneous moral outburst,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
And
Yeah.
hopefully it will change things. I really do.
Hmm.
But it'll need the help of experienced political operatives to come in and give assistance to the Gen Z people, right?
Got it.
Um, I don't believe they themselves would have the skills to be able to
Hmm.
maneuver in Nepal's political environment.
Yeah, thank you so much, Professor, for all your insights and expertise into this matter.